Long before Jacques Cartier bumbled his way along the rocky shores of the St. Lawrence, the village of Monaco was already established. When I walked along the town at night, I was intrigued by the obscure but undeniable fact that this was an ancient community, older than London, older than Rome. You could walk along canoe portage trails a few miles out of town and crunch your way across thousand-year-old pottery shards. Just north of here, you could climb a high ridge and find a row of mossy boulders arranged in the shape of a gigantic snake. Why was that snake here? I'd met archaeologists who'd told me that this settlement was probably about 10,000 years old.
It takes a lot of courage. Obviously, he puts himself in these wilderness situations. One of the greatest things I've ever read by anybody, it should be in the New Yorker, was his story about hunting alligators in Florida in a boat at night.
Once we get to the marshy parts of the lake, we growl along at a slow troll, playing a floodlight back and forth in search of the red cigarettes that are a drifting alligator's eyes. The large ones are wise to boats, and they tend to submerge when we're a good distance away. Juvenile alligators are stunned by the light, and not too bright in the first place, and they float motionless while we cruise up. Lying on the front deck of the boat, I reach into the water and grab them around the thorax. It's like lifting a toddler, albeit an insane one, with jaws like hedge clippers.
I've always been interested in how people behave when they're outside the envelope of normal societal standards and behavior. So at times over the years I've written about the wilderness where all bets tend to be off. I've written about crime, same thing really. It's just like the edge of society inside the city rather than outside the city. And I've done some war reporting and that sort of thing. And all of those things tend to have the same general conditions, which is all bets are off. Society has no writ here. Now let's see what happens.
He's funny. He's urbane and droll and not only self-deprecating but other-deprecating. You can't get too highfalutin with Jake. He's sort of a satirist, a gentle, gentle satirist.
I went to university and I was going to be an English professor, and because I thought being an English professor meant that you actually studied English literature, and you know, it was an understandable mistake, but I was completely wrong on that account. I quit university and I went off to the woods, and I lived in Monaco and I worked as a fishing guide and subsisted on various part-time jobs. I did a bit of substitute teaching. I worked in a jail at night, which was a fun job, believe it or not. And I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And then by the time I was in my late 20s, I had a couple of unpublished novels and a number of short stories and some magazine stories. And suddenly everything just started falling into place. I sold a magazine story about working as a fishing guide, which I've been doing for years. The first piece I ever sold for money. The editor was the one who suggested I write the story about it. I said, sure, I'd love to. So I wrote it. It took me about 3 hours. I sent it in. I didn't hear back from her, Toronto Magazine, and I thought, well, of course, they probably didn't like it. And then I contacted her about 3 weeks later, and I said, did you get a chance to look at it? She said, oh yeah, that's great. We're sending you $1,000 in the mail. Will that do? And I thought, yeah, that'll be fine, because it took me 3 hours to write it. So I took that and a few other small checks, stuck them in the bank, and I thought what I'll do is I'll quit doing any kind of work other than writing, and I'll just try it out for 3 months, and I've been doing it ever since.
Most recently, he published a non-fiction book about grizzly bears in North America, which took him all across the North.
In writing both fiction and non-fiction, you're relying upon a blend of memory and experience, stuff that has already happened, and then stuff that you have to make happen. And you have to throw yourself out into the real world and go places and expose yourself to the kind of the belt sander of existence and see what happens. when the point starts to sharpen up, because, as I say, things always turn out differently than you expect.
He grabbed my head in his jaws, shook me, and pulled my scalp half off. Then he grabbed my arm and shook me the way a dog shakes a rat. Then he threw me into the bushes and walked away. It was all over in 90 seconds. Did you play dead? In my opinion, all that advice they give you about whether to play dead or fight back is useless. When a bear attacks you, it's like being hit by a train. You have no time to do anything. You're not even thinking. You're just being thrown all over the place. Why do you think he attacked you? He didn't say.
He's an adventurer. He has the greatest memory of anyone. I think that's one of the things that makes him such a good storyteller.
I'd say he's one of the children of Ernest Hemingway.
Steve Earle says you need an inquiring mind and a fearless heart, and I can't imagine it being better described. The work I do for love is what I think of as the date I came to the dance with as a very young person, when I was working for free. And I actually didn't want to submit any work because I was afraid somebody would tell me it was lousy, and then that would take away the one last thing that was really special for me in my life. So I was the pure writer in the garret in those days. That was, as I say, the person I came to the dance with. And I want to go home with that person at the end of the night. And I want to feel like I've retained a connection to that writer who's working with no attachment to outcome. Some writers say, oh, you can't plan a story. And other writers say, well, I know the story from the first sentence. I think John Irving said, I write the end of the story first. Whatever works. You discover the story in the writing of it. And then, of course, when you get to the end of the story, you have to go back and do it again, because you haven't really come to understand the story until you're about 3/4 of the way through it. By that time, you've laid down a lot of false leads and dead ends earlier in the story. So it's a process of writing everything at least twice, sometimes 5 times. The daily reward is the feeling of creating life under your fingertips, literally, maybe like a potter would do, or like a sculptor would do. It's really for me, it's really a physical process. You're hitting keys and you're making words. And if you hook the words together in an artful sequence, you feel like you've created something that's almost alive. The question you hear from people all the time is, so do you jump out of bed inspired at 1 in the morning? No, you get up in the morning and eat your breakfast and you go to work. And you bang away all day long. In a whole morning, you might get off one good sentence amongst 93 other sentences. But that one sentence is enough. To write a good sentence is a hell of a thing. Even to this day, I feel very much like an opportunistic, an omnivore, trotting down the fence line, hoping that something's going to pop out of the weeds in a few minutes, and it's going to be a cold night, and there's no safety net, there's no backup. You're out there in the pure Darwinian world, but that's great, because if you can stay sharp, you can survive. And if you're not sharp, what's the point?